Tonight's the latest in our series of interviews with the Scottish party leaders. Before we hear from the Scottish Liberal Democrat's Tavish Scott, here's a brief reminder of how he got where he is now. Tavish Scott went to school in Lerwick in Shetland and to college in Edinburgh. He became an assistant to Jim Wallace, who was then the Liberal Democrat Scottish leader. He spent time as a press officer with the party before moving back to Shetland to run his family's farm and to be elected as a councillor. Elected to the first Scottish Parliament in 1999, he soon joined the new coalition executive as junior minister for Parliament, only to resign over a point of principle to do with fishing. He was back in government in 2003 as Deputy Minister for Finance and Public Services, proudly pushing through the legislation to provide for PR in local government. And in 2005 he joined the Cabinet as Transport Minister. Out of government in 2007, in spite of being re-elected with an increased majority, he only had to wait a year to be elected to take over from Nicholas Stephen as leader of his party. His UK counterpart is now Deputy Prime Minister. Tavish Scott's biggest electoral test comes in May. Well, a short while ago Tavish Scott came into the studio. I asked him for his big idea for the election campaign.
I think we've got to concentrate on jobs in Scotland. We've just got to make sure that the Scottish Government, the new Scottish Government, not only creates jobs but creates the conditions for new employment in Scotland. And we've also got to concentrate above all on the inequalities in society. I don't think we've done enough on that in 12 years of devolution, and we need to make sure that the kids from the poorest backgrounds that just don't have a chance in the modern world we lived in do. And that's why we as Liberal Democrats will set out plans on both those crucial areas as the election campaign gets underway.
Yes, but jobs are good, inequality is bad. That's a nice thought. It's not a policy.
And we'll set out, you're right, a plan for both those aspects as the campaign gets underway. But on jobs, we have proposed a new approach, for example, to the bureaucracy that confronts business at the moment. There are too many quangos. We want to sweep away those and instead have regional investment banks that concentrate on the local economies we have right round Scotland, that get money moving in the economy, that lend money to businesses that do need to create jobs. We're the only party saying that. And at the same time, we need to see reform of lending across the banking sector. All of those aspects can start to develop the kind of dynamic economy that we want to see in Scotland. And so, yeah, we need a plan, you're right. A regional
investment bank would be funded by whom exactly?
By using the monies that are currently spent in numerous quangos that still exist in Scotland.
So you get rid of things like Scottish Enterprise?
We would, yes. We would concentrate on making sure that there was very strong private sector-led investment plans in local areas, concentrating on creating jobs, concentrating on the businesses that we need to support, I think, to make a new economy, to develop the potential that Scotland really has.
Now, the question which I'm sure you will be asked as you outline these terribly detailed policies on jobs by the voters is, given the record of the Liberal Democrats since last May, why should we, the voters, believe a single thing that you may or may not say in your manifesto?
Well, you're right. We only missed out on a Commons majority by 259, so it is difficult, isn't it, to achieve your whole manifesto when you're that far short of an overall majority. I don't think the party south of the border had any choice but to get into government, because the alternative was the Tories and the Tories alone, and I think our colleagues south of the border have...
But the problem you have is people understand that if you go into a coalition government, you can't have all your policies. You did that with Labour here, but you were able to point to things like free personal care, tuition fees that you got through.
Yeah.
Your colleagues, including some very close colleagues in Scotland, have broken personal pledges which they signed on tuition fees. They said, no matter what happens, we will not go back on this. And, you know, this is not just an arcane issue. Voters are saying, we cannot believe a single word these Liberal Democrats say. They've just proved it.
Well, I'm certainly very disappointed about how that issue was dealt with, not least of which because in Scotland we have such a good track record of what we've done on higher education.
Sorry, what are you disappointed in?
I'm disappointed by how that was all dealt with south of the border, because in Scotland we abolished tuition fees.
But you're disappointed that your colleagues broke the pledges that they made?
Well, absolutely. I wouldn't have gone in that way at all, because I think it was an important aspect of how we fought the election campaign. But
so what would you have done then?
Well, we're not in that position in Scotland, Gordon, the point I was seeking to make. Because
but if you're disappointed in Danny Alexander et al., what would you say to them they should have done instead?
Well, I think what I need to do in Scotland is concentrate on what we've done in Scotland. I'm just
curious, it's an important issue.
Well, but what's important in Scotland is how we fund our
Yeah, but what's important for you in
education.
Scotland is your credibility.
Well, but I best show that by the reality of what we did in Scotland as Liberal Democrat MSPs. And over 12 years, we made sure there weren't tuition fees in Scotland. We worked with the current Scottish Government to abolish the graduate endowment as well. And we invested, as Liberal Democrats in Scotland, more money in higher education, in universities in Scotland, than any other government had to. We've got a good record on the importance of the sector to Scotland and what we've done for it. And that's the best way I can answer your question. I mean, you'll need to ask Westminster colleagues why they did what they did. I'm not one of them. But what I did do in Scotland as an MSP was vote to get rid of tuition fees.
How interesting you say that. You say, because you say, look, I'll need to ask your colleagues in Westminster, I'm not one of them. That's not the way the voters are going to see it come the Scottish election.
I'm not sure
they
that's
are going
true.
to say, look, you're one of the people who are running the government.
But
you went back on all your promises. Why should we trust you?
Well, they also promised, if I may say so, to take 90,000 Scots out of tax altogether, and that's what's going to happen on the 1st of April, to restore the link between pensions and earnings, which never happened under 13 years of Labour, and that's happening, and also to end the detention of children at Dungavel. That's happened, didn't happen under Labour. There are many things I think Liberal Democrats can point to positively about the difference they've made. Can you imagine a Tory government by themselves in London taking people at the lowest level of incomes out of tax altogether? I certainly can't. So I think there are some concrete positive arguments that we can make. But I just think it's important to reflect that there's a difference between different parts of the country. That's devolution, after all, Gordon, is it not?
Right, well, if it is so different, can you give me a single Liberal Democrat policy that you would commit tonight, personally, that you would not sell in a coalition deal?
Well, we'll set out our manifesto, but I think
but can you give me one thing that you could tell?
I'm not going to set out all my policies on your programme tonight.
I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm suggesting give me one Liberal Democrat policy which is so important for you in this election that you will give a pledge right now to the voters.
Well, I think I've learned enough about pledges, if I may say so. But look, you judge me on my record.
Well, Nick Clegg's a very good teacher. You just break them all.
Well, no, OK, you can describe it in that way if you want. But judge me on my record. When I was a minister, when I was in a government in Scotland, we delivered three-quarters of our manifesto. So in Scotland, when we had these difficult challenges to deal with, when we worked with Labour in a government in Scotland, we were able to make sure that the things like free personal care for the elderly, getting rid of tuition fees that, of course, Labour introduced, and making sure that fair votes for local elections all happened. And if I may say so, many folks said we wouldn't get it done. Many commentators said we hadn't a chance, and we did. So judge us on what we've done in Scotland, working in a Scottish setting.
Let's just take the example of the thing that you're so disappointed in your colleagues at Westminster about. Will you give a commitment now that the Liberal Democrats will not accept any system of payments by students in Scotland?
Yes, we absolutely don't believe that's the way forward.
Now, when you say that, you mean that in a Nick Clegg, Danny Alexander?
I know it's great fun to play fun with this Gordon stuff.
But you're saying you would not go into a coalition. That would be make or break.
I mean, I hope you either taking my integrity apart or you're not. When I was a minister in Scotland, when I was an MSP in Scotland, in these last 12 years, we abolished tuition fees, we invested in higher education, and we made sure that the sector grew. So I think our record is very clear.
But it's not an unreasonable question.
For stuff that's happened elsewhere.
Look, hang on a second. Labour may well move to a policy of wanting a graduate tax.
Well, they may move to lots of things. They changed their position.
Yeah, but the point is, within a few months, you could well be in a position where you're deciding whether or not to go into a coalition with Labour. It's perfectly reasonable to say to you, would a make-or-break issue for you be no payments by students?
Well, we'll set out our policy in education, but I'm very clear that we do not want tuition fees. We voted to get rid of them in Scotland.
I don't think Nick Clegg wants them.
Sure, but whatever's happening in London, I am simply saying is not the circumstances in Scotland, because we don't have tuition fees now. I think it's important to reflect that those fees did exist south of the border because Labour put them there. The debate was about raising them, not introducing them altogether. They don't exist in Scotland because we worked really hard with other parties to stop that happening, and that's, I hope, what will continue.
Given that I presume even you don't think you're going to emerge with an absolute majority in this
I'd
election,
accept that.
Who would you prefer to be in a coalition with?
Well, I think, as we've often discussed, the people will dictate the new parliament, will determine.
But would
who's
you
the
rule
largest
anything
party.
out? The SNP, for example?
No, I certainly will let the people, because that's what happens in elections, decide who is the largest party.
But you wouldn't rule it. I mean, you
No,
wouldn't go into coalition with the SNP last time.
Well, I think we had very clear reasons as to why that didn't happen at that time. But I think what's important is that people will decide the new parliament and will work.
But one
with
of them wasn't it?
whatever
Was that the SNP wanted a referendum on independence?
Well, what did happen to that?
Yes, but that's going to be their main plank in their election campaign this time, isn't it?
They had a chance in the last 4 years when they were the government of
But
Scotland.
that's still an issue that would rule you out of an alliance with the SNP.
We'll see what they say, but I don't know if they're going to say it. They certainly don't talk about it much these days, do they?
Right, but if they do, I'm just curious, because you said this was a matter of principle for you.
Well, I obviously don't believe in independence, but honestly, they've had 4 years as a government to introduce the policies they want, and we haven't even seen a bill. I mean, we were told it was going to be on Burns Night and then St Andrews Night, or on Alex Salmond's birthday. We haven't really seen any of it, have we?
Right. What are you going to tell voters during the election about the economy? I mean, just this week, we've seen growth. Let's forget about the fall. Let's just say it's flat. We've got inflation way above expectations. We've got 1 million young people in Britain on the dole. How are you going to explain to people why Labour is wrong to say that the way your government is cutting public spending is going too far too fast?
Well, I think the best answer to that is actually Labour's proposals would have made the cuts over 7 years. The current UK government is making those changes over 5 years, and I think most people understand that's not a great difference. But I fully accept your argument, which is we're in a very difficult economic time at the moment, and I share the worry of many commentators that I've read this week who've suggested that the recession is really difficult and deep, and we need to make sure that we invest properly in the right areas to do that, and that's why the economic proposals we've got that we discussed earlier are part of that proposal we'll make.
But again, I see why you would want to do this, but the point is, you're not just Tavish Scott of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats are running Britain. It's not, whether you're worried about their economic policy or not is not the point. It's your economic policy.
Well, actually, this is a devolved election for the devolved government of Scotland, and we, I think, have different approaches in different parts of the country as to how best we deal with the overall economic circumstances. I mean, I can't dictate the overall monies that the Scottish government, the new government after May, will have available to it. I can argue for a different approach in Scotland as to how we deal with the economic circumstances we find ourselves in. Otherwise, what's the point of devolution? That's the whole point of having different approaches to the circumstances we're in, and that's what we'll set out in an economic plan for the future.
Do you really think that if irate or even non-irate voters say to you, you Liberal Democrats are making a hash of running the economy, we're not going to vote for you, and you say to those voters just what you've said to me, that's going to convince them?
Well, I think actually most voters in Scotland, indeed the great majority of people, know fine that the economic mess we're in is down to Labour's mismanagement of the economy and to the crisis that happened in banking. And if Labour think they can get away with simply forgetting about that, I think they've got another thing coming.
So the fact that you've been rocketing downwards in the opinion polls in Scotland has got nothing to do with what's happening.
If I believed every opinion poll that I'd had and all the other things that were predicted for me, I wouldn't have an MEP in the European Parliament. I was told we wouldn't get one of those. I was told last year that half my MPs would lose their seats, and they're all back in. So I think I'd have stayed and shuttled it up LAR if I believed every opinion poll in the last few weeks.
So you might actually be running at 35%.
Well, do you know? Well, you may know opinion polls better than me, Gordon. But every time I've watched them, they've downplayed our chances of doing well in elections, and I think we've confronted them most times. We'll do that again this May.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Tavish Scott, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.